Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Today I am going to deliver a lesson for class 12th subject Zoology. In our previous topic, we have discussed about the various aspects of immunity, and we have also discussed about the various barriers of innate immunity in our previous topic, in which we discussed about various barriers of innate immunity that include physical barrier, physiological barrier, cellular barrier, and cytokine barrier. Now today we will discuss about the inflammatory barrier, which also belongs to the innate immunity. The inflammatory barrier, commonly known as inflammation. First of all, we must understand what is inflammation. Inflammation is basically the reaction of a living tissue to an injury. And this inflammation is broadly categorized into two types, that is, the acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. Acute inflammation is a very rapid type of inflammation, whereas the chronic inflammation is a slow inflammatory response. First of all, we will discuss about the acute inflammation. The signs of inflammation are pain, redness, hotness, and swelling at the site of injury, which is also termed as dolor, rubor, calor, and tumor. The pain is also called as dolor. The redness, which is caused at the site of inflammation, is what we call as rubor or redness. The site of inflammation also becomes hotter than other areas. That is why it is this hotness is referred as calor. And there also occurs swelling at the site of inflammation, and that swelling is termed as tumor. Now, initially, these four signs were considered as the signs of inflammation. That is why it was said that inflammation is the redness and swelling with heat and pain. That is dolor, rubor, calor, and tumor. Now, recently, a fifth sign of inflammation has been added, that is the loss of function of that particular area. Now, these are the local inflammatory responses, that is pain, redness, hotness, swelling, and loss of function, which occur at the site of inflammation. And sometimes inflammatory response is systemic, which is associated with the generation of fever. And this fever is basically due to the release of chemicals called pyrogens by leukocytes, or what we call as white blood cells. These pyrogens secreted by these leukocytes set the body's thermostat at a high temperature. That is why sometimes doctors prescribe antipyretic medicine like paracetamol, etc., to lower the effects of these pyrotics. Now, we will discuss about the injury that causes the inflammation. As already said, that inflammation is the reaction of a living tissue to an injury. Now, we have to understand about the injury that causes this inflammatory response. Now, this injury that causes the inflammation may be physical, chemical. Sometimes some chemicals also cause injury, and this injury may be thermal, that is the excessive heat or excessive cold, which causes the tissue damage or injury. Similarly, this injury may be some sort of infection like bacterial injury, viral injury, protozoal injury, etc. And sometimes there is electrical injury. So, in broader sense, injury can be categorized as physical injury, chemical injury, thermal injury, bacterial, viral, and electrical. Now, any sort of injury leads to the inflammatory response. Now, this acute inflammation is characterized by two main events. The first event is the vascular changes, that is the changes which are caused in the blood capillaries. In blood capillaries, what happens? Because of the response, inflammatory response, or these injuries, the mast cells present in the endothelium of the blood vessels burst, and these mast cells liberate certain chemicals like histamine, serotonin, bradykinin, and other slow-releasing substances. Now, these chemicals cause vasodilation or dilation of the local blood capillaries that ultimately increase the blood flow in those blood vessels. And this vasodilation brings cells and proteins to the site of inflammation. Now, the second event which is caused in this inflammation are the cellular events. In cellular events, what happens? The first step which takes place in cellular events is known as chemotaxis. This chemotaxis means the adhering of these white blood cells to the inner walls of the endothelium, as is seen in this sketch. This is a blood vessel, blood capillary, and this is the site of injury. And the local blood capillary actually dilates because of the histamine and other slow-releasing substance. Vasodilation takes place. Because of vasodilation, more and more blood flows through these blood capillaries, and ultimately the white cells or leukocytes adhere to the inner walls of these blood vessels, which is known as chemotaxis. This chemotaxis occurs 30 to 60 minutes after the onset of inflammation. The circulating neutrophils begin to stick to the inner surface of endothelium of the capillaries, and the next step after the chemotaxis is the diapedesis. Diapedesis actually is the passage of blood cells, that is the leukocytes, through the unruptured walls of the capillaries into the tissue cells. This is the diapedesis. That is the movement of these white cells through unruptured walls of these blood vessels at the site of injury. And once these leukocytes are out, they reach to the site of infection and ultimately engulf or swallow the causative agent. It may be bacteria or any injurious agent, which is known as phagocytosis. Now, this is a very important inflammatory, very important behavior, which includes the innate immunity. Now, in our next lesson, we will discuss about this immunity, the other aspects of immunity. Until then, goodbye and good luck.